Hey there, and welcome to That News You Care About, a weekly video game news show from the folks over at That Nerdy Site. Today is Monday, August 16th, 2021, and I am one of your hosts, Logan Wilkinson. Joining me this week is my Phoenix son, Trevor Starkey.
Hello.
Hello. Trev, there's been a lot of news in the video game industry the past few weeks, and it hasn't been that uplifting, if we're going to be frank. And so this week we decided to do something a bit different, a bit more lighthearted, and talk about the best video games from the years that we were born, 1992 and 1985, respectively.
85.
So yeah, we're going to sit down. What I said? Oh, yeah, 85. Yeah, 1985.
Yeah.
For Trevor and 1992 for myself. So we're going to go through 4 or 5 different games from that year, talk about them, our experiences with them, if any. And then why we think they are kind of representative of that year and that era, if you will. Trevor, I will let you go first as the person who had a birthday most recently. So what is the first game that you want to talk about from 1985?
So I have, just as a heads up, a total of looks like 9 games that I pulled onto this list for the sake of conversation. I didn't know, we didn't really establish kind of a cap or anything going into it.
I have my main 5 and then honorable mentions. So that works perfect.
So yeah, I mean the first one I'm going to go with, because also this is a very, in 1985, it was slim pickings, but of course, 1985 being the year that the Nintendo Entertainment System came to the United States, to North America, following up the Famicon's success going off of 1983. Of course, I got to kick things off with Super Mario Brothers, Super Mario Bros. 1, the follow-up to the Mario Bros. Game. And basically the father of modern platforming as we know it. That crazy little plumber guy jumping down pipes, jumping on Goomba heads, and taking out Bowser and saving the princess. It is while it's not the first game I ever remember playing, I do have memories of playing Pitfall before I ever played Mario. I definitely have fond memories of playing Mario with my family, with kind of the when we got the Nintendo Entertainment System growing up, having that in our house, connected to our big screen TV, which was, I don't know, probably a 50 inch TV or something like that at the time. It was a big old standing unit. It took up pretty much a whole wall in the family game room or whatever, and I remember playing that and just loving the finding the secrets to it and the hidden warp pipes and stuff like that. And it's still a game that is fun to go back to and revisit, obviously, given the number of times that Nintendo has re-released it over the years. I remember especially one instance back in college with one of my college girlfriends. I had unearthed my grandmother's Nintendo. I went back to my grandmother's house in Michigan to help her kind of pack up because she was moving, and she was my cool grandmother that had a Nintendo that we would go and play in her basement when my sister and I would go out for family reunions and stuff like that over the summer and stuff. And I remember playing on her Nintendo and stuff. And when she was moving, it was largely because she was old, her eyesight wasn't great anymore, so video games weren't a thing that she needed in her life anymore. So I basically inherited her NES and the game collection as a thank you for coming and helping pack up her library and stuff like that. And so I brought that back with me, and with my college girlfriend at the time, we sat down in her place and basically did a challenge of let's take turns playing through the game and see who can get farther. And I think I made it through 3 worlds. And I specifically didn't didn't do the warp pipes to give her a fighting chance of keeping up against me. And I still ended up getting way farther than she did in that. But that was that one of my more recent memories of hopping back into Mario. It was obviously an influence in the Mario 35. I think that's the most recent time that I played it, was in that weird battle royale kind of spin on the Tetris 100 that they did on the Switch. Played a few rounds of that and was just okay, yep, this, I mean, it feels like Mario. I'm not interested in playing it with like people throwing a whole bunch of like enemies at me and stuff like that. But you can go and hop in and play it on the NES Classic or whatever on the Switch too. And then obviously I played it on the NES Classic for one of our Let's Play series and stuff. So yeah. I mean, just an all around standout of a game that obviously spawned something. I mean, like it basically like made Nintendo Incredible. Who they are and remain to this day. Yeah. So yeah,
I think that I mean, obviously, so much of video games can be directly traced back to the original Super Mario Brothers. Like it is like kind of like point zero for so much of what video games began, right? Like we mentioned it kind of briefly off air, but like 1985 was basically the year that the modern video game industry was created, and in large part it was created because of Super Mario Bros. 1. And so I think the wildest thing to me about the game is how well it does hold up 36 years later now, right? From when it came out in North America, so even longer, obviously, in Japan. But, I mean, it is...
Actually, I think it came out in 1985 in both. It just came out, like, early 1985 in Japan, and then...
36 years ago. Yeah, I mean, like, it is... It's wild, right? Like, it is very clearly rough around the edges in certain areas. It is not, like, the cleanest or, most enjoyable of the Mario games that will come from it. But how much it does stand the test of time after all these years. And in particular, like, World 1, Level 1 is, in so many ways, almost just, like, a perfect level of a video game, right? Like, and it was deliberately kind of designed to be just, like, this is how you play video games from now on.
Mm-hmm.
And it is still such a brilliant intro level that, like, might be the best tutorial still. And I think those are the kind of the things that I think back. I'm going to think back on Mario 1 a lot. Like, certainly we both have played Mario 1. And yeah, it's not my favorite Mario game, obviously. Even more so because I'm a 3D sucker. But I think that what that game did, what it achieved, like certainly in terms of like all of the games we'll talk about, I imagine only one or two can even come close to being in the same conversation in terms of like historical impact as this game. That's a great choice to get us started off on. And in that spirit, Trevor, I'm going to pivot us to a Mario Universe game as well. Back in the good old year 1992 to Super Mario Kart.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great Mario Kart game. And made even better by the fact that its immediate sequel in Mario Kart 64 is not good. And so this is the last good Mario Kart game we got for a hot second. And just like Mario Bros.
It's also the first Mario Kart game we ever got, so it set the standard. It
set off on a high note. Yeah. I think that, it's impressive how well it holds up, right? Like, I think there are certain video game generations that just hold up better than others, right? And I think NES and SNES is... You don't think it holds up well?
I don't think this game holds up well at all. No, like
really?
I played it on the SNES Classic a little bit back when like that came out, and I was like, "Ooh, this is rough. This is a rough
Interesting.
Game."
How long has it been since you played Mario Kart 64? I wonder.
I guarantee that one doesn't hold up either. I'm not saying that like any of them hold up. I'm just saying like
sure.
I do not think the Super Mario Kart one held up all that great.
I think it holds up better than 64. Which might be, complimenting some of like faint praise there, but I think that it's a great game, right? And especially at the time, right? Of like, you had this and like F-Zero, like kind of the immediate two I think of in terms of like early racing games, and I think there's just a sense of charm to every Mario Kart game. That's part of what makes them special. They're a ridiculous idea behind it. But I think, the first one, it was just such a novel thing. And like, even as a kid, right? Because I played obviously we both played all these games that came out of birth year a couple of years later. But I think there was just such a charm to it, right? And such a fun sense of kind of wonder, right? And like this is still when like Nintendo hadn't gone like the Nintendo that we kind of critique a lot. I think they were still doing new things. They were still kind of earning the stripes in the industry, and like this is such a cool new idea. And I think it certainly at the time worked really well, even if it's how it's held up as debatable. And yeah, I think a lot of the games on my list, there's going to be an element of just this is a really fun, enjoyable video game, which sounds really simple, but is not. And I think especially in terms of like the emotional, like sense of enjoyment and fun that it instills in you. And so yeah, Mario Kart or Super Mario Kart is the first game from my year of '92 that I'm giving a shout out to. Trevor, what's next?
So the next one I have on my list, I probably did not play the 1985 version of this game, but I'm sure I played one of the follow-up releases, and that is The Oregon Trail, originally released for the Apple II in 1985. An icon of childhoods for, I mean, like, at least, given like its place in like pop culture, it seems that most people had a similar upbringing to me where like they played some version of Oregon Trail in their like computer classes in school.
Absolutely.
And yeah, like I remember playing this, like it was this or we had like these like you're running a lemonade stand and you need to like figure out the right mix of like ingredients versus cost and the right like sales price for your stand to like maximize your profits or whatever. And it was like, as a math nerd, I liked that game, but like Oregon Trail was where it was at. Like Oregon Trail was the game you would play when you like kind of wanted to ditch, lunch outside at recess and stuff like that, and would like go to the computer lab and play the game there or something like that, or just your like weekly computer class. It was like, oh, we get this, like today's an Oregon Trail day. Excellent, this is going to be a ton of fun. So yeah, shout out to Oregon Trail. It's definitely a game that like I've continued to love over the years. It's definitely one that like I'm sure if I went back and tried to play like the original version that I had played, I would probably have like I would like to think it would be a much easier experience nowadays. Now that I'm not a dumb kid that can't figure out.
It's pretty hard.
Maybe you shouldn't just try and go through on a grueling pace of everything. Like maybe try a slow and steady wins the race kind of thing. But yeah.
I think that might be my favorite pick of either one of our lists, this entire list. I love the Oregon Trail. It is one of my favorite games of all time. It is so much of, I think, those exact moments you talked about, like being in computer class in, first, second, third, fourth grade at John Thomas Elementary School in Nixon, Missouri, and playing Oregon Trail, right? And for us, some days we just get like a free day in computer class, like on like Fridays to do whatever we wanted for like the 40 minutes. And then usually we would have like our assignments, and then whenever we got done with them, we could do what we wanted the last like 10 minutes or whatever. And so it was like starting games in those last 10 minutes and trying to get as far as you could, or on like the Fridays where it was a free day, just like trying to do like a whole run. And Oregon Trail is sort of like this mythological entity for me because I never finished it. Because me and my friends, because you'd obviously name the other characters after your friends in computer class in school, we would always like get to varying degrees of kind of completion, and then either class would run out or we would die or something would go wrong. And like I remember getting to the final river, kind of like dashed at how the game ends to get to Oregon. Like literally I could count them on one hand the amount of times, and like that, like your like palms are sweating now, like perspiration's drenching, like you're just like, it's such a built-in moment, like all the friends are huddled around you watching if you're going to be the one who finally beat the game, because like no one else in the class has ever gotten that far, right? And then inevitably like smashing it onto a rock because it's 1999 and it's hard to like steer your mouse while navigating a fucking river.
That's like
it's never getting.
I love that because like the version I played wasn't even like a mouse and keyboard version. It was keyboard only. Like there was no mouse.
Ooh. Ooh.
Yeah, no. I think even like the shooting like the for like ox or whatever. Not
That
not
was
shooting
definitely
ox,
just
shooting
a keyboard.
buffalo.
Yeah, you didn't have to use a mouse for that.
Like there wasn't like a mouse to like it was moving the arrows and then like hitting spacebar or something like that. So yeah, I don't. I mean, it was like. Because I remember like coming back to the Oregon Trail like a few years later or something like that, or like when we had like a personal computer, but still couldn't play it because it was like a Macintosh only kind of thing because Mac sucks. But I remember like the graphical upgrades that like that game would get over the years, over the generations, compared to like the largely text driven one that I played that was like. You were like it was you were on a horizon, you were just kind of like slowly, but it was like very like minimal graphics, minimal 2D graphics trying to get you like across the plains.
I think Oregon Trail's rad. It was one of my favorite games of all time, like I said, and it ended up being the inspiration behind a really well-received piece I wrote back in the day as well, called My Oregon Trail, that I think that kind of gave me the template for a lot of the writing I would do for the next couple of years in terms of the kind of stories I would tell within games. I think there's so much poetry in Oregon Trail. I think that to me is such a textbook example of like a game allowing each individual player on each individual playthrough to have their own kind of narrative crafted around it, right? In terms of like the highs and lows of the journey, in terms of the characters you encounter and lose, and the stories that you can kind of tell within that. It is a choose your own adventure game done so well in so many ways, and I find it really, really beautiful in that regard. Yeah, and that's a great, great, great game. And whenever I wrote the My Oregon Trail piece back in 2017, I believe, I finally went back and played the game for the first time in years, and I actually successfully finished the game. A little spoiler alert, because the My Oregon Trail piece, which I based off of that journey, ends ambiguously, but I did actually finish the game and beat it for the first time ever.
That's what I'm saying. Like as an adult or coming back to it, like you now understand the things that you didn't understand when you were like a 7-year-old or something.
People definitely still died. Like I definitely still lost people. It definitely wasn't like easy. But yeah, I mean, it was easier. But that game, that's a great pick, Trevor. Yeah, that's gonna be the one for me and one of my favorites of I think either one of our years. Wow, Trevor pulled out the big guns. So I have to do the same for my next pick. One of the standout titles from 1992, I think. One of the standout titles, some might say, ever released is going to be my next pick. And that is, of course, going to be Sonic the Hedgehog 2.
Oh, God. I'm looking at, 1992 video games, and I knew that one was going to be in here somewhere. But, building it up with the hype, there are, at least 2 other games in this 1992 list that I would say deserve that hype better than Sonic 2.
Sonic 2 is one of the most important games ever made. It is really Sonic as a whole in that era, right? It defined the early 90s in terms of, the Nintendo-Sega feud. And whether you think the games are great or not, these games are important. And I also think Sonic 2 is good. In fact, I think it's probably the best of the 90s Sonic games, or certainly right up there. I think Sonic is such a quintessential 90s experience for me. Right? Sonic to me just screams the 90s in terms of how they try to make it have the attitude and using air quotes for the audio listeners, edgy, and he's colorful and he's brash, and he borderlines is arrogant. He's everything that Mario isn't, right? And it is such a colorful whirlwind, all about momentum, just never stop experience. And there are parts of that don't work, that didn't work then, that don't work now. Obviously, Sonic has never been as good as Mario. I don't think most real fans would never say that those games were, but they also weren't trying to be, right? They were doing something
Oh,
deliberately
yes, they
different.
were. They were definitely trying to be like better than Mario.
Maybe, but like I think they were also doing it in a very different way, right? And I always liked that, right? Like I never viewed this as a like blood feud, like I had to pick Mario or Sonic. I liked both. Both were great. And so and it helped that by the time I was like cognizant by like 96, the fight had already been won. And so right, like I think Sonic 2 is a great game. It's just, again, it goes back to like, that game is so fun, and that game is so 90s, and right? And that game is such a huge part of my childhood, right? Like, you spoke for, Super Mario Brothers 1 in terms of like, it might not be the first game you played, but it's one of your earliest memories. Sonic 2 and the Sonic games in general, they might not be the first games I ever played, but they're certainly up there, right? Some of my earliest memories are playing them on the Genesis, or probably more accurately, watching my brother play them, and just kind of, again, falling in love with the games, right? Like, I think I was really fortunate to be born when I was, for a lot of reasons, but also for growing up at that moment in the video game industry when it kind of felt like it was growing up with me, and kind of coming to age really kind of in terms of like mentally and physically being able to play video games in like the mid 90s where we had the NES era had kind of come and gone, but now like, Mario Brothers 3 was still out there and still was very recent, right? And like Mario World and Sonic, and then moving really firmly into like the N64 era of Mario 64 and Donkey Kong and Mario Kart 64 and GoldenEye, all these kind of games, and, Banjo-Kazooie, that I think were so perfect for a young kid growing up to really fall in love with the industry, right? In terms of just being bright and colorful and deliberately marketed towards children, right? Like, it made it really seamless and easy, and Sonic, to me, is, like, such a great image of that, and part of it is because, like, Sonic is essentially just a Saturday morning cartoon into a video game, right? They did it kind of in the opposite order where, like, they made him a game first and then the cartoon, but, like, that's what that character is. He would have fit perfectly in like WB's Saturday morning cartoon lineup, even before he was. And so, yeah, like I think Sonic is great. I love Sonic. I think Sonic Mania takes that character and gives you the perfect Sonic game in a lot of ways, right? Which is not a 10. It's an 8. It's great, but not flawless by any means. And I think it captures the spirit and ethos of that character really well. So that's my second game, is Sonic
2. Number 3 for me, I admittedly don't have like a ton to say about this one, but it is one that I remember playing fondly growing up. And it's interesting because like I occasionally still like dip my toe in this realm of games, and that is the very basically named Golf for the Nintendo Entertainment System, because that was again the era where you just had games named with like there was no game ever before called Golf, so they just made a game called Golf. And I remember playing that a lot. My dad enjoyed golf. He had a set of clubs, and like would occasionally go out and take them out to the driving range and stuff like that. And like this was an accessible way for me to play golf. And like I just always thought about it in terms of like it's like mini golf because it's, on a computer screen or on a video game screen compared to like, like there was no way 5-year-old Trevor could hit a 200-yard drive or something like that. So I was never going to actually play like real golf, but like I could play video game golf because I knew, okay, if I get the bar up into like the yellow area and then like come back down and hit where I need to hit it like at the right target, like that's doing all of the legwork for me and stuff. And so I would play golf with my dad. Like that was definitely like a fond like childhood memory he and I would have growing up. And like I definitely was never smart enough at the time to understand what like the arrows meant when it was like the wind is moving at this many degrees or whatever. It was like, and so I would get mad when like I would, try and do like a straight shot or something, and my dad would have to explain like why my ball curved one way or the other or whatever. But yeah, it's definitely a series that like, or not a series, but like I occasionally enjoy hopping back in and dabbling in a golf game or something like that. Most recently, like I did the golf mini games in Yakuza, and while I have like my own issues with that, like the mechanics going all the way back to golf for the NES are pretty much still the same mechanics you get in these kinds of golf games in Let's Golf or the Hot Shots golf games. Like it's the same kind of thing. It's you aim and then you do the power meter and you try to not slice it or whatever the other version, whatever the other side of slicing it is. So yeah,
I mean,
golf.
you say for like Hot Shots and all those kind of things, are like Mario Golf, but even like Tiger Woods PGA Tour, right? They still use the same core mechanics essentially, right? And I like golf a lot, right? I'm one of the people who like I will watch golf be played even. I find it's like a sport I find really soothing to watch. And like it's like the perfect like Sunday morning, afternoon, just like put the TV on, watch some golf, and just like vibe and just like relax. And yeah, someone who's played a fair bit of golf as well. That's a great pick. I've obviously never played golf, but I've played a lot of the Tiger Woods PGA golf games and really enjoyed my time with them. And yeah, like I've totally content to be proficient to decent at the PGA Tour golf games, right? And like while never fully mastering the wind and the spin and all that kind of stuff as well, just like you. That's a great pick, right? In terms of just like, I don't have any sport games on mine unless you want to be really generous and call Super Mario Kart a sports game. But I mean, I think that's
in the Game Awards conversation, it's always in there with sports.
That's technically true. But yeah, I think it's a great shout out for golf.
Yeah.
My third game, I'll do. I want to think about this. No, I'll stick to my 5 and then do the honorable mentions last. I'll do it that way. I'm gonna give a shout out to. I'm gonna give a shout out to another game from a character that I like a lot. I think I like a decent amount, and this is gonna be Kirby's Dream Land. It's not my favorite Kirby game by any step of the imagination, but it is a really good Kirby game, I think. And I really just want to give a shout out to Kirby in general because the early '90s were great for Kirby, and the mid '90s. No, I mean, like, I don't have a ton to say about this one because it's not my favorite Kirby's game, but I do want to give a shout out because I do think it is one of the better games from '92 still. And yeah, I mean, like, I think it's Kirby is such a weird video game series for like a lot of obvious reasons. But I think it is just such a utterly charming game. I mean, they took the idea of like, what if we give Jigglypuff a video game series and made it work and endure for like before he even was a character, right?
I was gonna say, years before Jigglypuff exists. What if they gave Jigglypuff a game?
Yeah, but like and made it endure and made that work and endure for like what 25 plus years now, right? Like it is a ridiculous idea of a character. It is a ridiculous idea of a world and everything about it and mechanics, but it works more often than not, I think. And, going back through the, I think, now you're going to question, but I believe it's the NES Classic, and playing whatever Kirby game they had on that one, because I can't recall off the top of my head, obviously. Trevor's in the research. Dream World, I think.
Is it? Is it Kirby's Dream World? No, that's on that was a. I don't know. Kirby's Adventure, I think, is the one that's on the NES. Yeah, I think it was the.
We're doing research on the spot,
Kirby's Adventure.
Kirby's Adventure is what I'm seeing as well, so that's what we're gonna say. And if it's wrong,
yeah, and then like Superstar, the Super NES, the SNES Classic has like the. Whatever, like the 6-in-1 games that it was, whatever the Kirby one on that one was.
I'm saying Kirby's Adventure. If they don't, it's Kirby's Adventure. Yeah, which is like probably my favorite Kirby's game, and one of the weird surprise and delights of the NES Classic. I believe
it was also like the latest game that came out on the NES Classic because it's one I haven't played as I've been going through game. Yeah, that game came out after this game that you're talking about. Yeah.
Yes. And so I think that it is a really bananas series, right? Like it all like obviously the whole franchise started here with Kirby's Dream Land, and so I think to see kind of the evolution, the arc of it, and how kind of mainstream that character has become, I've always enjoyed, right? So yeah, I just wanted to give a shout out to Kirby's Dream Land because it is a really fun game, and what it spawned, I think, is really, really neat. Trevor, hit me with your fourth 1985 video game.
So this is another one I admittedly like. So like part of the problem is I really didn't play a lot of games from 1985. So the one I have here is Excite Bike, which was like a pivotal game of the NES.
Yeah.
But I think I touched on this when I did the Let's Play of it for that Nader site. Like, I never had the game growing up myself. My next door neighbor had it, and I remember like occasionally going over and playing it at their house. But yeah, it was just never it was never a game that made its way into like my collection over the years. So like I don't have this like deep affinity for Excite Bike. Like, it was a fun, different thing to play when I would go and play at their house, but it was never like a part of my real upbringing or anything like that. So it's definitely one that like, but I know, you know, there is like a significant like fandom around it for what it was doing with, you know, with like a motorbike game kind of in that era. And that's another, like, I feel like that was a precursor to a lot of the same kinds of things we see in those games, you know, the extreme sports games that we still get today. A lot of them are doing similar things to what Excite Bike was doing way back then.
I think Excite Bike's a great pick. I had never played Excite Bike. I think, again, it's all pretty nebulous in like the mid-90s when I was growing up. But I'm pretty sure I'd never played it until the NES Classic came out. And yeah, I mean, Excite Bike is great. It is easily, like, I think, one of the more fun games on that. And that, to me, is a great example of something that is really just a really simple game, but that has so much replayability, I think, and so much, like, variance and layers to it, and that you can just spend hours, like, just days getting lost in Excite Bike. That's a great pick, I think. That's a really good game to give a shout out to. I'm gonna say my next game that my last two of my like big five are arguably the two biggest heavy hitters. I'm gonna give a shout out though to possibly the founding father of the first-person shooter, certainly in the run-in, which is Wolfenstein 3D.
This is it is, and this is the one where you were giving like the whole like precursor thing before Sonic 2. I was like, I feel like he needs to.
There's another game that is still left in the wings too. But
I mean, that's this is one of the two I had that was like, okay, like this is one of the seminal 1992. Like, this spawned an entire genre that, you know, is arguably like the biggest selling genre in video games to this day.
Yeah. Wolfenstein's rad. I don't know how many people listening have ever gone back and played the original Wolfenstein 3D, but it's rad. And I think it holds up. I mean, not spectacularly by any means, but like better than a lot of first-person shooters from 1992 or 3 or 4 or 5. And the central like mechanics and, you know, idea that they I think build this game around are so absurd and ridiculous and fun, and obviously, like Trevor has already touched on, it spawned an entire generation in its wake, right? And I think there's so much that works in Wolfenstein, and that can be found in the fact that the series is still going 29 years later with really great new additions, and some additions that are not very good, but it has kind of run the gamut, and I think its constant ability to evolve and reinvent itself as a series and to kind of trace the evolution of first-person shooters as a whole, right? Because the Wolfenstein: The New Order, which is the first one of like the new reboots, I believe, is really one of the smartest first-person shooters I think I've played in years. That game is so smart and so clever and so unabashedly political and story-driven and character-motivated. it is an incredible evolution from what Wolfenstein 3D is, which is none of the things. Wolfenstein 3D is the caricature of a first-person shooters, of just being like dumb meathead blow thing up games with Mecha Hitler, and I think it works in both of those two extremes of the genre so well and so effortlessly that I kind of find myself constantly marveling at Wolfenstein, right? And in terms of like the two big tent poles of the early 90s first-person shooters and Wolfenstein and Doom, I personally was always drawn more towards Wolfenstein.
Okay.
Even back in the day, and even now, I probably lean more towards, the new Wolfenstein versus the new Doom. It's close, but I think how Wolfenstein plays and feels a bit more, both in 92 and also in 2016, 17, whenever the first rebooted Wolfenstein came out. I think it is just a series that has evolved more than Doom has, I think, and has allowed itself to mature along with people that are playing it, I think, and has allowed itself to evolve into something very different from what it was. Because Doom has also evolved, obviously, as well, but it is still, I think, very Doom. Wolfenstein is, some of my favorite moments from the new Wolfenstein games, in particular the first one, because I infamously don't like the second one at all, is the moments where you don't shoot a gun at all, right? The moments where you just explore the bases, right, and have completely combatless chapters of the game that I think are, like, brilliant. I think they're so smart and clever and great, and to see where that series has gone, I think, anyone talking about the best games of 1992 and arguably some of the best games of the 90s in general would be remiss if they did not talk about Wolfenstein 3D.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely played Wolfenstein 3D like when it was coming out around like in that era, and then like I remember playing that a lot, and then I really liked Doom a lot more because it was, I think, a more refined version of what Wolfenstein 3D introduced. But then really the one that I spent my most time with was, shamefully, because I was a 10-year-old kid or whatever, was Duke Nukem 3D. Which was
100%.
like building upon and had like snarky humor and stuff, because like Doom was violent and action filled, but like there wasn't a character to Doom, there wasn't a character to BJ Blazkowicz in those earlier eras, but like Duke Nukem was a character. He's throwing out one-liners and stuff like that.
100%.
But yeah, I remember going back, or not even going back, but like they included like the original Wolfenstein levels in the more recent like Wolfenstein New Order as like Easter eggs and stuff. And I just remember being like, oh yeah, these definitely feel rough in like a modern setting and stuff like that.
Sure.
So yeah, but yeah, I mean, yeah, it was definitely like of the Wolfenstein Doom debate, I always gravitated more towards Doom probably.
Sure.
And like a lot of that was probably just because like graphics of the time, like that was way cooler. Although I will say that we've neglected to mention the absolute best Wolfenstein, and that is Chex Quest, because getting that game for free, as a prize from buying a box of Chex, did more for Chex than probably anything else in the world ever has. And I remember playing Chex Quest so much growing up, because it is just a reskinned Wolfenstein.
I also want to give a shout out to your mention of Duke Nukem, which in that tripart debate of like Doom, Wolfenstein, and Duke Nukem, I definitely played Duke Nukem the most out of those three games, right? And it helped that it came out the latest of them, and that it is basically, a combination of the two, right? It has like the kind of humor of Wolfenstein and kind of some of the absurdities of it with the more refined kind of gunplay and speed of Doom. And that was the game that I played. That is the game that is such a 90s video game, and like all of the negative connotations of that.
Yeah.
Again, that is like grotesquely, gross, and almost every single thing it does. but yeah, I mean, was such a cornerstone of '90s first-person shooters, and sort of where that genre to be morphing and evolving into. Yeah, that's a great shout out. Trevor, what is your fifth game we're talking about here from 1985?
So the fifth one I have on my list here is it's a game I've probably maybe never even played. Like I definitely played at least one game in the series back again when I was like visiting family in like Michigan. They had the game on their computer, but I don't even remember if it was like this version. But it is another series that would go on to spawn much greater things, and that is Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego?
Yeah, that's a great pick. God damn,
Originally released in
1985?
1985. The first one was originally released by Broderbund that year, and yeah, would go on to become a game series, but then like a cartoon and a game show, of course, with the incredible rockapella sound intro theme, and then it's just like
and a rebooted show now.
I mean, yeah, it's now a rebooted show, and it's just like this, like it was even, I was looking it up and being like, did that start out as was that a game first, or was that like a concept and an idea that like evolved into a game or something? No, it was a game first. It was basically like a history and geography kind of like quiz type of game that we would eventually get more with the Carmen Sandiego like game that I really probably played the most was Mario is Missing on the Super Nintendo. And I still think of like that when I think of like the Trevi Fountain in Italy.
Okay. Shut up.
And yeah, it was just like it's a game that, again, I don't think I ever probably really played, save like maybe one of the later versions at family's house in like the early 90s or something. But just the character that it spawned and the idea that has kind of survived even to this day of Carmen Sandiego and that whole like idea is just really cool.
Yeah, 100%. That's a great shout out.
Again, like slim pickings for like actual games that I have a lot of personal experience with in 1985.
Sure, but that's a great pick. I mean, Carmen Sandiego is great. Those are some of my favorite. Again, as someone who's like never really been a PC gamer, right? Have always kind of gravitated more towards consoles. When I think of PC games in my lifetime, I think basically of like, yeah, it's the mid to late 90s, maybe if you're really generous, like the early 2000s, and playing like, like Double Fine games, right? Or even like stuff that predated that, like when he's back at like Lucas.
Yeah.
Or like Carmen Sandiego or Oregon Trail, or like these like puzzle solving games that would give kids in like computer class of like, all these like math and geography and science games, right? Like these very obtuse puzzle games are what I think of. And yeah, Carmen Sandiego absolutely fits into that realm as well.
Do you ever play the Dr. Brain games?
Great. 100%.
Yeah, like those.
I don't even have to think
those
about
are the
that,
ones that I played in Broderbund,
Mm-hmm.
the same company behind Carmen Sandiego here. Like those were the educational games that like I remember playing growing up. Were the Island of Dr. Brain and stuff like that.
The other big, I don't know if it's going to fit in Eltros, I'm going to say it right now. The other big PC games I played at the time were, I'm going to forget it now. The, kids version of sports games. I can't remember the name, but they're all, like, just, like, the kids doing, like, football or baseball or basketball. Like, Pablo Sanchez is one of the kids' names because he was, like, the maxed out stat character. Backyard baseball, there he goes, the backyard games. Like backyard baseball, basketball, football, soccer, and like football and baseball in particular. Yeah, those are the like quintessential like late 90s, early 2000s PC games that I played.
Like this just reminded me like the because I definitely don't remember any of those games. So those all passed me by.
Those are definitely after you were like a kid.
To put my like when I was playing like Oregon Trail and stuff into context, I was putting in the like flat floppy disks, not the hard disks that like are the save icon, the precursors to those. Those were the disks I was sticking into like the Apple computers that we had, the Macintoshes, whatever versions we had of those. It's just like, oh God, I'm old.
I wonder even if Frank ever. Because Frank is, I mean, the youngest of all of us. If he ever even dealt with floppy disks, like I'm trying to even think, because like,
I mean,
like definitely
like floppy disks.
Because even in like elementary school,
yeah,
like, we still use floppy disks for like our shit.
I mean, I guess maybe, yeah.
And that was like the late 90s.
Like the last time I remember really using floppy disks was for The Sims, and it was like the Sims would come on like a CD, but you could download like other items from like fan sites and stuff like that. And I had I had a lot of stuff downloaded and saved to floppy disk that I think I still have the floppy disks somewhere, like the hard disks rather. But yeah, I mean that was definitely that was what not like late 90s, I guess, or early aughts. So yeah, I guess Frank maybe actually had to deal with those, but
he's 20.
It seems very unlikely.
25. Yeah, that's a great pick. Yeah, I'm gonna end my big 5 of games that I have. Will be the game that I think is my personal favorite from 1982. I'm sure it is no surprise what I will pick here, mainly because it's the only big game left from 92 that is like a giant one. It is Mortal Kombat.
Yeah.
It is absolutely one of the most important video games ever made. Especially with the controversy that it erupted from this game in the 90s. And this is like, when I think of video game controversies, I think of like this game and I think of hot coffee. These are like the two things that I always think about first and foremost. And it helped that Mortal Kombat was one of my favorite games as a kid for years and years and years and years and years. I think I've mentioned the story on some podcast in like the thousands I've done of like the fact that I dressed up as Sub-Zero for like 3 Halloweens in a row. Like I loved this video game. I loved the characters. They're like so perfectly made for like kids to fall for them. And like whether it's Sub-Zero or Scorpion, Luke Cage. Like I think it is such a
Liu Kang.
Great
you mean?
Cast of characters. Liu Kang, thank you. And I think that it is
Johnny Cage.
I think it is. Yeah, that's what I got the two mixed up. It's such a great forefather for kind of the fighting game movement, right? That obviously existed already, but this game took it, I think, to such another level and was such of the zeitgeist of the moment. And I think, Mortal Kombat is just Mortal Kombat, right? It is one of the earliest games I can think of that like transcended games and went into being a major motion picture film, right? That like for years was maybe the best video game movie we got for arguably like a decade, right? Until maybe Lara Croft, right? If not longer. And I think the first movie, for what it's worth, is actually pretty fun. The second one's pretty rough. But, Mortal Kombat's great. I mean, it is a great video game, and, I think it holds it pretty well. I loved the whole, debate and, hidden rumor playground shit of, the Nintendo one versus the Sega one, right? Blood versus not blood debate, right? I loved, trading stories on the playground with the kids of, learning moves and combos, which I was never really great at. I'm not great at fighting games because I just can't wrap my head around the mechanics of it in a lot of ways, but always having fun because none of us are really that great yet, right? That was the thing. That's what made. I don't want to be the old man on the fucking front porch, but that's what kind of made the 90s to early 2000s kind of cool. Was that the internet, online gaming didn't really exist, certainly in terms of console games. So there wasn't just some kid on the internet who could just kick your ass in 30 seconds, right? You actually got in matches with your friends, and they could only be so much better than you because y'all were playing the same games at the same time at each other's houses basically every day. So you pretty much learned anything they learned pretty quick, and so it made for really fun matches and marathons. I'd be playing Mortal Kombat for 3 hours, 4 hours at a time, just trading off characters, going through the story of Mortal Kombat as we got to later games. I'll never forget my childhood best friend Brandon. Either he rented it or he might have even owned it, or I did. One of the PS2 Mortal Kombat games, right? And just spending an entire night and then day just getting as far as we could into the campaign, which got really hard. And just like going through that and like laughing at how like absurd and like convoluted the campaign and story of those games gets. And yes, like Mortal Kombat to me, out of all the games I've listed, is like the one that defines 92 and really the early and mid 90s for me in so many ways is this game, right? Like this is one of the games where it is one of the earliest games I ever saw, I will say. If not played, certainly I was seeing this game probably way too young, my brother playing it on endless repeat, because it was a game that we played constantly together once I'd gotten older, right? And then playing with my friends. And I think Mortal Kombat is just one of those games, a little bit like Super Mario Bros. 1 that we kind of began with, where it might not be the greatest game of all time, but it is one of the most important games ever made, and it had such a huge impact on the industry, and it is still a series that exists to this day and is really fun to this day too. So yeah, my final shout out, and the one that would be my pick for the best game of 92, would be Mortal Kombat. Shout out to Sub-Zero. He's the best.
Yeah, I'm really curious, like, when you would actually have been playing that, and if this was the version you actually played, like, first kind of thing, or if it was, like, one of the sequels and stuff. Because, again, like, it came out the year you were born, so by the time you were, old enough to be, like, actively playing games and stuff, we were probably into, like, Mortal Kombat 3 or even 4.
The trick, too, is that, like, I don't know, obviously because I was just born, like, I don't know if my family got a Genesis, right? Like, so I don't know if we had one when it came out, if we got one a couple years later, if we got one maybe even more than that later, right? Like, I know that by, like, 95, we for sure had a Genesis, right? So, like, by then we did, but, like, I don't know how much before, because I don't have memories of that, obviously, really.
Yeah.
So, like, I'd have to double check with my brother, right? Like, because my brother would have been, when I was born, he would have been 5 or, like, 5, 6-ish range. So, like, they conceivably could have gotten the Genesis for him at that age, right? And so it's possible that we, certainly in the household was the original Mortal Kombat. Even more so by, like, 95, 96, when we would have gotten more Genesis games, obviously. I have no way of knowing if this is the first one I saw or played, obviously.
Yeah.
But
it's you mentioning of course the debates that I had, growing up was the Nintendo versus Sega versions of it on the playground, and the blood versus no blood, or like figuring out what the cheat codes were to get the blood and stuff. But the version I really had and played was the Game Gear version. Yeah, that was like the one that we had in my family. And I don't remember necessarily why, like, because we had a Sega Genesis too. It was just like we got that one maybe for like road trips and stuff like that, or like but that was like, and I still have that cartridge somewhere to this day, my original Mortal Kombat on Game Gear kind of cartridge. It's like one of the, like, it's that and probably like Sonic 2 or something like that on Game Gear that are the surviving cartridges that I have to this day. But yeah, I obviously, like, that was an iconic game of the year. I was more probably used to playing it with friends at arcades and stuff like that, because that was in an era where we were still doing that, where that was still a thing.
Yeah.
Up until like Mortal Kombat 2 was where I think it really took off, because they had such an expanded roster of characters, and there was just like so many more to play as. Because like even in the in the Game Gear version, I think Kano isn't in that game. I think like for the size of that game, like they had to cut out one of the players, and I think Kano was the one that wasn't in that version of the game. So I remember like playing it at the arcade was the only place I could play as Kano if I really wanted to play Kano or something like that. But yeah, it was definitely, like, of course, and I mean more even for than the game itself or the movie or whatever. It's what gave us the ESRB, so we're definitely still feeling its impacts all these years later. This and other 1992 mainstay Night Trap, were the ESRB games. So the next one I had on my list, speaking of arcades, is Hogan's Alley, which is a game.
You're on your own.
Yeah, no, I know. This is a game. I mean, the closest analog you could think of would be the shooting gallery game in Back to the Future 2. Like, that is a Hogan's Alley type of game, where it was it's just like it was an arcade game that I believe did eventually, like, it came to the NES and you could play it with like the light gun and stuff. But it was very much like just early video game shooting gallery kind of thing. So like in your era, we got around to Wolfenstein 3D, but in my era, we were still stuck with like, the popping up things, and then like don't shoot the woman, like only shoot the robbers or the bad guy. Don't shoot the cops. Don't shoot the women. Don't shoot the hostages and stuff like that. And so that's just a quick little nod I wanted to give, because I definitely remember playing that a ton in that era. Throw it to you for another honorable mention.
We're into my honorable mention section now. Yeah, we've done my big five of Sonic and Mario Kart and Wolfenstein, and obviously Mortal Kombat, which would be my game of the year probably if I did it for that year. So the first shout out I will give is one tailored to Trevor Starkey. It is going to be Final Fantasy V. I don't actually know what I have nothing to say about this game.
Mm-hmm.
I've never played Final Fantasy V. I can't tell you a single thing about it.
Yeah.
Other than it's not 6 or 7 or 3.
Mm-hmm.
So this is all for Trevor Starkey, but that is a game that came out that year. That is a big deal. So Trevor Starkey, tell us about Final Fantasy V.
So yes, technically it came out that year in Japan. We did not get it here until the PlayStation port 7 years later in 1999. That was one of the, famously, Final Fantasy 2 and 3 out here were 4 and 6. So this was the game that, entered the series in between those two. But yeah, it did not come stateside. The Final Fantasy we actually got that year was Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, which is notoriously like the easiest Final Fantasy game that exists. Is, and because it was very much the same kind of mentality behind like, well, we don't want to give them, Super Mario Brothers 2, the lost, which we would eventually get as the Lost Levels, because that's just too hard for those dumb Americans. And that was kind of the mentality behind why we got Final Fantasy Mystic Quest. It was like, it is a super basic game. I did not know this when I was playing Mystic Quest over and over and having a good time with it as a kid. It's not until like years later when you start to like realize the history of the Final Fantasy series that you realize that was basically like them throwing us a bone with Final Fantasy graphics on the Super Nintendo because they didn't think we were smart enough to understand what was going on with the job system in Final Fantasy V here. Final Fantasy V is admittedly one that I've probably only played like once, maybe twice in my life. It is the one of the ones that is like more sparse because it didn't come to like to stateside until the PlayStation, one of the PlayStation 1 collections. I think it was like 4 and 5 was in one collection, and then like 6 and Chrono Trigger was another, I think. Or maybe it was 5 and 6 and Chrono Trigger and 4. I don't know. Like, whatever it was, like, I have that 2-pack that came very late in the PlayStation 1 generation, and finally eventually played it there. But ultimately, like, even then, like, I bought that pack for the game that I really enjoyed, be that either 4 or 6, the one that I had, like, fond memories of growing up and stuff. So I think even then I didn't really play it at the time, and it wasn't until like around the time Final Fantasy 12 was coming out on the PlayStation 2 that I decided to do like a full playthrough of the series, of every game in the series that I could. And I think even then I couldn't play Final Fantasy 3 at the time because I don't think the DS port had come out yet. So it was definitely like it is one of my like lesser known and lesser understood. Like, I could not tell you the story of Final Fantasy V. I know its big things were the job system. Damn. and like I can occasionally kind of pick out elements of Final Fantasy V, But yeah, it is one that is largely an unknown to me. It's one of those, like, it was a good game. It doesn't fall in my, like, these are the Final Fantasy games I never want to play again. It's just from an era that I never really got behind because it didn't come out here at the time.
Fair enough. Trevor, what's your next game?
So my next one is Gauntlet. And I will give a side shout out here to Brandon Gann, who brought Gauntlet Legacy, Gauntlet Legends, or something like that. One of the Gauntlet games into that Ultimate Video Game List show, season 2. It might have actually gotten, like, vetoed, now that I think about it. Like, he might have brought it in there, and then Zyger, being a troll, vetoed it just so Zyger could get, like, another game on the list or something like that. But yeah, it was definitely a game that I remember playing a ton as a kid. It is notoriously, like, a quarter suck in the arcades because it was a game, like, 4 players, and they were like, we need to figure out a way, like, this is a game that if you're really good at it, you would, throw in a quarter and you could play it for a while. And so to combat that, they basically made your health always depleting. So, like, you're going to have to put more quarters in to get more health. Really, like, super shitty business tactics and stuff. Like, the original kind of, like, microtransactions being these kinds of arcade games. But when it eventually came to, and this is one where, like, the version I probably played the most was, like, the N64 version years and years later. But, a fun kind of, like, premise of, you pick one of 4 different, like, warrior types. You've got your warrior, your barbarian maybe, or your Valkyrie, or your mage, like whatever the archetypes were. And, like, each one had different skill sets and different abilities and stuff like that. And this was kind of the originator back there in November 85, that just, took many a kid's allowance.
That's a great shout out. That's a deep cut. My next shout out is going to be another one that I have very little to say about. It's one, if I've played, it's very little of it. But is still an important series, which is Contra 3, The Alien Wars. I'm someone who thinks Contra is fine. That might be my hottest take on Contra. I think it's fine. I don't get it the same way, like, some people love that series. But it's unquestionably an important video game series from the early 90s and late 80s. Contra 3 is not the best Contra game, even from my limited exposure to the series. But it is one that I think continues the series and continues the fun elements of it. And the always goofy, ridiculous elements of Contra. Like I said, I don't have a ton to say about Contra 3, but I did want to give it a shout out because some people would be angry if I didn't, probably. And because it is still a neat little video game. So it gets a nice little honorable mention shout out here. Trevor, any Contra 3 shots?
No, I played
Shut up.
Either the NES or the Super Nintendo Contra. And that was probably about it. Like, I never really got it. I never really got behind Contra. And even that one, I think, was another one that was like, I don't think we had it. I think my neighbors had it. And so, like, the occasional time I would play it was with them. So yeah, it just never really clicked and resonated for me. I have 2 more. First one here.
I will do 2 more as well.
Is Paperboy. This is the original arcade version of Paperboy. Which, of course, would eventually spawn the NES port and stuff, which I played way more the NES version. And I just remember, like, not understanding the idea of the game when I was originally playing it, and just throwing papers into windows and stuff like that, and thinking I was doing really well. And because it wasn't just like hitting the wall and then, like, thumping to the ground or whatever. It was like, I didn't realize the premise was what a Paperboy should do, get it in the mailbox. And so, like, I would never get too far in the game because, like, by the second run or whatever, it was like people had unsubscribed and we're not I didn't have too many houses more to hit. And then I just remember, like, also the just the weirdness of, okay, you make it through like the first half of the map that is your route, and then you have to go through like, this hellscape of a junkyard with like ramps and like tires flying at you and stuff like that, and just being like, what is this game? Why is this so hard? But that was definitely one that, especially for like, that era of video games, tons of replayability and tons of fun behind it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great shout out. That might be the last actual really great game either one of us has, but maybe not, because my next game is Streets of Rage 2. So again, I'm someone who's predisposed to not like beat 'em ups. I find them to not be really my bread and butter.
Mm-hmm.
Partially because I'm not great at them, partially because it's just like I don't really like it as someone who again loves stories and cool characters and all this kind of stuff, and you're not getting that certain Streets of Rage. But people love this series, and I don't think I really understood the level of people that love the series until I really started doing more things in the industry. People love Streets of Rage, and so yeah, they very much gets a shout out. I've played a very small amount of Streets of Rage 2 in particular. It is the only Streets of Rage game I've even touched.
Mm-hmm.
It's a nice beat 'em up, right? I mean, that's really all I can say to it. But this is such an important touchstone for a lot of people out there who play video games, especially those who kind of grew up in the 80s and 90s. So I feel like I had to give Streets of Rage 2 a shout out. It is, spoiler alert, the last possibly great game. My last shout out is going to be one that is much more focused on me and fellow kids of my ilk, but Streets of Rage 2 is the shout out I'm giving right now for my honorable mention.
As I was predominantly, while we were, fortunate enough to be a Nintendo and Sega family, pretty much the only things I really ever played on Sega were like the Sonic the Hedgehog games, which I enjoyed them at the time, but I was also a dumb kid. They're not good games. But then so Streets of Rage was never I never got into it. I did not I finally played a Streets of Rage game with Streets of Rage 4, I think last year. I played it because it was on Game Pass, and I think I even played it on my PC. When
you were like, this is fine.
Streets of Rage 4 was a really fun game, and it is a really good beat 'em up brawler and stuff like that, and had I think that one in particular, they do a great job of building in replayability, because you complete a run and then you unlock characters. You unlock the Streets of Rage 1 version of these characters, and you can go back and play them in their pixelated glory and stuff like that. But yeah, so I just never the series was never something that I connected with. The brawlers that I was playing probably during this era were Final Fight on the Super Nintendo and stuff. Which, I mean, same premise, same idea of a game, but just that was because I was more ingrained in the Nintendo side of things. That's just where I experienced it. I just never got into the Streets of Rage series.
Trevor, give us, I believe, your final game here.
Yeah, my last one
here.
What
do you got for
us? I would say still definitely constitutes as a good game, and also is a very important game in that this is the game that gave us the Konami code. This is the original Gradius. Came out in 1985. Yeah. Came out in arcades in December of 85. This is another game that I would much the version of Gradius that I probably got really into was probably the Super Nintendo version of Gradius, whatever Super Gradius or whatever that iteration was. But even going back not too long ago and playing Gradius on the NES Classic and plugging in the Konami code for the first time and getting all of the power ups and stuff, it was okay, yeah, this is a solid side-scrolling shooter, the shmup kind of space shmup that era gave us, a plethora of kind of games in. This was one of those early iterations of that, and I think they did a great job with it, and I think that as a game, because that game style is still fun and arcadey You get it, the modern iterations being stuff like Resogun and stuff like that. Like, there's still a ton of fun to be had in that kind of like high score chasing, like just one more run kind of game like that. I think Gradius still stands out as a solid game, but obviously the thing I've more experienced over the years
100%.
has been the Konami code.
Yeah, that's a great shout out. Yeah, that's a really good one to end on, and I think was one of the games I was surprised by on the NES Classic, where I'd basically played like 2 of the games prior. That was one that I discovered for the first time, and I really enjoyed my time with it. Plus, like you said, the Konami code is iconic, beyond iconic. My last shout out is, not gonna lie, a bit of a cheat, but what's a good podcast without that? I'm kind of combining a few different games because it's all about kind of the larger thing they are, which is, my last shout out is Batman Returns. It's Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis.
It's the movie tie-ins, yeah.
The Addams Family. It is the movie tie-in, like property. It's like the Lion King, right? Like any game that came out, right? Like that is tied to a movie is such a huge part of my childhood, and I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about it as part of the games that came out from the year I was born. Yeah, I mean, that to me, it's wild. I'm like, I want to do like almost like a podcast or some sort of discussion around this. Like, it is wild how important tie-in games were in that era and growing up, and how virtually non-existent they are. And obviously a big part of this is because it made James Bond go away for like 10 years as a video game property. But even beyond that, like, there are a lot of these games that are really bad. E.T., for example, right? Really buried in a desert. But there are a lot that are fine and fun. There are very few that are like great, I will acknowledge, but there are a lot that are like in that in-between space that are 6s and 7s, right? And I think I would love to do a video game Let's Play series of us just going back to a lot of these like standalone movie tie-in games and playing through them, right? It will be not simple to do, but like there's such a huge part of my childhood, right? There's such a huge part of, I'm sure, yours as well, and anyone who grew up in like the 80s and 90s, right? Like movie tie-in games felt like they were 50% of video games.
Yeah.
And it continued all the way through like the PS2 era, and then that was kind of when it really kind of marked the close on that. As the video game industry kind of continued to grow and evolve and kind of begin to establish franchises in its own right and characters in its own right and needed them less. And I think, gamers began to understand these games aren't usually that great, and began buying them less. But I mean, the movie tie-in games are such a like ingrained part of growing up in the 90s. I feel like I played them. I mean, that was, again, half the games I rented, from, Batman Returns and Lion King and the Addams Family, all the way through like The Godfather, right, on the PS2, and Scarface, and I think, and countless Terminator games. I think that, they're not great. Almost, I mean, very rarely. But they are fun, right? And I think one of the things I've realized in the last couple of years that I've begun to miss to some degree are 7s, right? Are 6 and 7 video games, right? That aren't great, and are flawed in sometimes not insignificant ways, but that are still just fun, right? And that are charming and have maybe a really cool idea or mechanic or character or story beat, and just like something to them, right? And as kind of a lot of like the, mid-tier games have kind of fallen away in the last couple of years, I feel like I've felt that absence more. And as like PlayStation has, at least briefly for a few years, kind of stopped doing really weird shit that they did almost exclusively in the PS2 era and a lot in the PS3 era as well. I've kind of begun to miss a lot of these like cheesy, hokey, ridiculous, goofy, silly tie-in games. So there was like Looney Tunes Adventures, or any of the Disney ones, or even the fucking like, I can't think of it now, but like the Red Cap character video game that they did as well. Like there's so many weird video game tie-ins they did, and I have such a soft spot in my heart for them as a series and as things that existed.
Were you
To say
talking?
nothing, obviously, of James Bond video games.
Were you talking about Cool Spot from the 7-Up?
That's the one. Yes, thank you.
So yeah, that's. I mean,
I just knew there was like red in a spot. Yeah, I was trying to think of like what was.
So there was like there was like a platformer game that was like Cool Spot, and I think it was like maybe Genesis, maybe Super Nintendo or something like that. The Cool Spot game I actually remember playing was like it was like a puzzle game on the original Nintendo.
No, it was a platformer.
Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking of.
Right, but like yeah, I mean like 7-Up was making video games, and the absurdity of that idea. Chex Quex, like I mentioned earlier, like
Yep.
Chex making a video game. I mean, the thing that I think we lose sight on in the areas of the industry we focus on are a lot of those games still happen. They just happen in the mobile space. And they're
Sure.
much smaller. I mean, there's way because all these companies realized to make a Spider-Man tie-in game, you got to put a lot of money behind that, and you got to do that years in advance before the movie's like out or whatever, because the amount of time that goes into make a video game these days at that level, it's just unfeasible. Like the Lego games are probably the closest things we get these days.
That's a great.
And like so eventually, and even that, like eventually we're gonna get the Lego Skywalker saga, but they stopped doing that. They stopped being able to keep up with those games in like Force Awakens time, because of just how much like energy goes into the tie-in game. So yeah, they still happen. Or like, I mean, the thing I think of right now, since Cameron and I went and saw Free Guy this weekend, is they just they added a Free Guy skin to Fortnite, and an emote that you can get in Fortnite. So those are where these kinds of like tie-in deals are happening now. Is they're happening in Fortnite, or they're happening in your big MMO. I mean, like what I saw somebody posting that like Stranger Things, whatever the tie-in with Stranger Things in one of the like the survival games or whatever is, ending in a month or so. So it's like those tie-in deals
Warzone had
still
Rambo
happen.
and Die Hard.
There you go. Yeah, the deals still happen. They just happen in a very different, like, it's very rare that it's like a full-fledged game you're gonna get.
A video
these
game,
days.
yeah.
I mean, like Scott Pilgrim's another one that finally came back recently, but that was like that was a tie-in game from 10 years ago, basically, from when the original Scott Pilgrim movie came out and stuff. So yeah, I think that is what's happened with those. But yes, I mean none of the ones really in '92 here, but like the golden era of like your Aladdin and your Lion King for Disney, like tie-in things, or even like DuckTales on the original Nintendo. The tie-in thing, it's not tied to a game, but the one from '92 that I played endlessly was the Magical Quest with Mickey Mouse, or the Magical Quest starring Mickey Mouse, on the Super Nintendo. I had a ton of fun playing that, because it was like I know Disney, I know Mickey Mouse, I know Pluto and Pete being the bad guy and stuff like that, and so playing that was like the precursor to Aladdin's out, and they made an Aladdin game. I'm gonna play Aladdin a lot. The Lion King's out. I'm gonna play the Lion King game.
Lion King's great too. Yeah.
So yeah, that era. I mean, just as games continued to develop at a faster pace than movies, it just became too unwieldy to try and make a game to coincide with the movie. And like we talked about in the sequel trilogy of Star Wars, for example, like they were cranking those movies out every 2 years. And like think of a AAA game being made in 2 years in like today, in like PS4, PS5 era, like that game's not going to be good at all, and it's going to be half baked. So like they just don't have time to put behind those ideas. I mean, like Ubisoft's working on an Avatar game that they've been working on for like seems like a decade at this point or whatever. So yeah, we'll see what happens there.
The movie or the game never coming out. Yeah.
So
yep, that is my last shout out. Trevor, I think we were actually born into pretty good years for video games, if I do say so myself, especially for them being pretty early years for the video game industry. Any final reflections on 1985 or 1992, the year in games?
I'm trying to look through, see if there's anything else I wanted to give some love to in the 92 era. Like Dragon Quest V is another one that like
I thought about
was
it, but I had
was a game
say,
just like Final Fantasy V. Like I feel like it didn't make its way stateside until many years later. So I don't have like the fondest memories. Mega Man 5 was that year's Mega Man installment.
Not a good Mega Man game.
I mean, it's the last one I really remember playing, and getting into. But yeah, that's probably it. Because yeah, the X-Men arcade game was 92. That was definitely a standout of that year. On the arcade side of things. Oh God, Krusty's Funhouse. That was another Super Nintendo game that I remember like wanting that game so much, and then when I would finally get to play it, I was just like, "This isn't good."
No. All right, that's the podcast. Trevor, do you have any shout-outs? Because I have one.
I will give a shout out to a series that I am. We're gonna see how this plays out, but the series that is our Let's Plays right now. Because we're recording this Monday, it starts tomorrow. I'm playing through Hades, and I'm doing like one run per Let's Play with the God mode on to see how quickly I can like clear Hades with God mode on. And so I sat down and recorded last night runs 1 and 2 that'll go live on Tuesday and Thursday, and I'm planning on, for this series at least, doubling up and also throwing in like Saturdays and Sunday runs to basically like make this not take forever, because I played through the game all weekend with like not God mode on, and it was like 24 runs before I finally got like a clear. So figure if I they're going to be short. They're on the shorter side of Let's Plays compared to like what we normally do, because it's 30 minutes a run or something like that. So, but yeah, that's the Let's Plays that are going live Tuesdays and Thursdays, and probably Saturdays and Sundays for the foreseeable future until I smack that Hades down and escape.
Hell yeah! I'm gonna give my shout out to a old feature over at Polygon.com. They did a few years ago, I think back in 2018, if I'm not mistaken. But I have it saved as a bookmark, and I just, for whatever reason, went over and just kind of read through the whole piece again yesterday or the day before. And it's a reflection on Red Dead Redemption. Like they did a whole series of reflections on it. And this one is about how Red Dead Redemption is the greatest Western ever. I don't necessarily know if I agree with that assertion, although Red Dead Redemption is certainly phenomenal. But I always love reading the piece, and it is written by someone who has a very familiar and intimate knowledge with Westerns and the idea of a super Western, and just Red Dead Redemption in general. It's really beautifully written. It'll be really easy for me to share that over with you for the Doc Trev.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great piece. I almost, as I was finishing reading it, I almost just sent it to you to read and be like, "This is a great." It's just a really great, well written feature, long for a piece of writing. So I encourage everyone to go check out this 3-year-old piece over at Polygon.com, because it's great. And I am always a sucker for the kind of the retrospectives that Polygon does, whether it's on Red Dead. They have a great one they did, I think, on the 10-year anniversary of The Dark Knight, that has a bunch of different pieces covering a bunch of different angles of these games or movies, whether it's Red Dead or The Dark Knight. They had one about Pirates of the Caribbean that I've given a shout out to before. So yeah, go check out that. Otherwise, that's the show. Thank you for listening. If you like what you heard, you can go support us over at patreon.com/thatnerdysite, like all of our wonderful patrons and supporters have. Their support means the world to us and helps keep the lights on and make shows like That D Plus Show and That News You Care About happen. Again, you can go over to patreon.com/thatnerdysite to go support us. You can also go support us by going over to your podcast service of your choice and liking, subscribing, sharing with your friends rating and reviewing us on iTunes. Giving us 5 stars. Giving us what you like or don't like. As long as you give us 5 stars, I don't care. It all helps bump us up in the algorithm and get more eyes and ears on the shows. Otherwise, you can go check out youtube.com/thatnerdsite. Hit the subscribe button as we continue to hit those subscriber numbers up. And go to thatnerdysite.com. Check out all the latest written features over there, as well as all the podcasts that go live over there as well. Otherwise, you can go find Trevor at Trevor J. Starkey, on the internet. Trevor, anything that you want to shout out or plug?
Yeah, so I definitely did my plug in the shoutouts section because we hadn't talked about having the dedicated shoutouts this time, so I did not realize you were talking about that form of shoutout. So I will, again, just kind of echo go check out the Let's Plays that are going live on youtube.com/thatnerdysite for me running through some Hades stuff.
100%. I concur in that. Go check out the Let's Plays in general. Maybe we'll get the Operation Tango one up eventually. Maybe Episode 4 is corrupted on my end. Who can say? Possibly me. But otherwise, you can go find me at LeftyLoggy or LeftyLoggy, Loggy, on the internet. I will second the YouTube shout-out. Trevor's doing great work over there, getting all the podcasts uploaded in video forms and all the Let's Plays that he is doing. I will give a shout-out to Times the Flat Circle, but this week's episode that went live today as of recording, so yesterday when you...
2 days
2 days from now when you listen to this, with Trevor and Cameron. I don't think Frank was on it.
Nope.
Talking about Free Guys.
Yep.
Fall Guys?
Free Guy.
Trevor apparently really liked that movie.
Yeah. It's really good.
And so it made me actually really interested to go check it out. I've seen all the stuff he's talked about and listened to some of it as well. And I'm actually really curious about it now in a way that I had zero pretty much interest beforehand.
I think it is a very Logan
go
movie.
Check that out.
I think you would really enjoy this movie. Yeah.
I love that. I love to hear that. So go check that out as well. Otherwise, you can go find That Nerdy Site at That Nerdy Site all across the internet. And otherwise, for myself, for Trevor, for all of us here at That Nerdy Site, play your games and be good to each other.